In the 6th century, something happened that historians still struggle to explain. This is the 6th month without a proper sun. It still rises each morning, pale and weak, like it's seen through ash. We wake before dawn, as we always have. We listen for the bells. We step into the fields when they tell us to. We planted when we were supposed to. We prayed when we were told to pray. We waited. Nothing came up. The soil stays cold, even at midday. You can feel it through your hands, through your boots, as if winter never truly left. The wind never stops. It moves through the fields like something searching. It finds every crack in the door, every loose seam in a cloak. Even indoors, you feel it on your skin. Our stores are almost empty now. Bread is thinner than it was last season. Then thinner still. We scrape the last grains from the sack like they're coins. The children ask for more. We tell them tomorrow. Tomorrow never comes. The animals have no grass. They chew at frozen ground. They pull at roots that hold no life. Their ribs show through hide. Their breath looks like smoke, even when the calendar says it should be spring. They grow thin beside us. They stagger in the fields. They lie down, and do not rise again. The priests say this is a test. Others whisper that God has turned his face away from us. Some say the sky itself is sick. Some blame strangers. Some blame sins. Some blame the dead. I don't know which is worse. We followed the seasons. We obeyed the signs. We did everything we were taught. So tell me, what do you do when even the sun no longer remembers you? The fear this farmer felt was not isolated. It wasn't confined to one village or one kingdom. Across Europe, people were looking up at the same sky and sensing that something was wrong. The sun was still there. It still crossed the sky each day. But it no longer behaved as it always had. Its light looked muted. Its warmth felt distant. As if something unseen stood between earth and the heavens. The color of day changed. Mornings looked bruised. Noon felt like late afternoon. In some homes, candles burned longer. Not because night had arrived, but because daylight wasn't enough. At first, many dismissed it. Weather had always been unpredictable. Cold summers happened before. People told themselves this was no different. They told themselves the sun had weakened before and always returned. They blamed bad luck. They blamed a harsh winter. They blamed each other, because that was easier than blaming the sky. But this felt different. From Italy to Gaul, from the British Isles to the eastern edges of Europe, the same descriptions began to appear. Observers wrote of a sun that shone without brightness, a sun that cast shadows as if the light was sick, a sun that looked like a dull disk behind a thin veil. Not gone, just robbed of its strength. Travelers carried the rumors along roads and rivers. A merchant would arrive with frost still clinging to his beard and swear the same pale sun followed him for days. Monks copied the strange reports into margins, as if writing it down might give it meaning. Even soldiers, hardened by hunger and mud, looked up more often than they should. In some places, it was said to resemble the moon, dim, pale, and cold, hanging in the sky where the sun should have been. The days passed. Then the weeks. And the light did not recover. Morning came later. Warmth arrived weaker. And even at noon, the air felt wrong. The seasons lost their rhythm. Birds appeared out of time, or not at all. Bees vanished from fields that should have been humming. No one understood why. There was no explosion. No fire in the sky. No comet blazing overhead to explain the change. No great war. No singular disaster. No clear omen to point to. Only a quiet, unsettling absence of what had always been constant. At first, life continued as normal. Fields were plowed. Seeds were planted. Livestock was driven to pasture. People believed the warmth would return the way it always had. They had to believe it. Because the alternative, that the sun itself had changed, was unthinkable. But the ground refused to warm. Morning frosts lingered far longer than they should have. Crops failed to sprout. What little growth appeared soon withered and died. Men walked the rows, crushing dead shoots between their fingers, trying to decide whether to plant again or save the seed and pray. In some places, snow fell in summer. In others, cold rains drowned fields already struggling to grow. Rivers ran high and bitter. Roads turned to sludge. Markets thinned, then quieted. Still, many waited. They waited because hope was cheaper than fear. Because to accept the truth meant admitting that no preparation had been enough. By the time the truth became impossible to ignore, it was already too late to replant. Too late to store food. Too late to prepare for what was coming. And slowly, a terrifying realization spread from village to village, from coast to countryside. Whatever was happening above them was not local. It was not seasonal. And it was not passing. Something had dimmed the sun. And Europe, still unaware of what it faced, was about to feel the cost. As the dim light lingered, the cold began to claim more than fields. The first to go were the harvests. Grain that should have ripened never did. Fields that once fed villages now produced nothing but brittle stalks and mud. When the autumn came, there was little to gather. When winter followed, there was almost nothing left to eat. At first, people rationed. They stretched meals. They boiled thin soups and told themselves it would only be for a short time. But the cold did not loosen its grip. Winter lingered far longer than it should have. Spring arrived weak and uncertain. Summer never truly came at all. Food stores emptied faster than anyone had planned for. Families counted loaves instead of days. Villages counted bodies. Those with livestock slaughtered early, hoping meat would last longer than grain. But animals that had starved through winter yielded little. What should have fed a family for weeks was gone in days. Soon, even that ran out. In some places, people ate seed meant for the next planting. In others, they stripped bark from trees, boiled weeds, ground roots into paste. Anything that could quiet hunger, even briefly, was tried. It was never enough. The weak fell first. The elderly followed. Children soon after. Graves multiplied at the edges of villages. Some were marked. Many were not. As hunger deepened, order began to fray. Markets thinned. Trade slowed, then stopped entirely. Merchants refused to travel roads lined with desperate men. Those who had food hid it. Those who did not went looking. Arguments broke out over scraps. Then fights. Then raids. Villages that had lived peacefully for generations turned inward, barring gates, posting watches, treating strangers as threats rather than neighbors. The cold made enemies of everyone. In cities, the situation was no better. Food that once flowed steadily from the countryside stopped arriving. Prices soared beyond reason. Bread became a luxury. Meat disappeared entirely. Crowds gathered outside storehouses and churches, demanding relief that did not exist. Authorities promised help they could not provide. Priests urged patience they themselves no longer possessed. Some prayed harder. Others stopped praying at all. Across Europe, belief began to fracture under the strain. Many saw the famine as punishment, a sign of divine anger, a warning that humanity had strayed too far from the path. Processions filled the streets. Men and women walked barefoot through cold rain, singing, weeping, begging the heavens for mercy. Others blamed darker forces, demons, witches, foreign gods. Whispers spread quickly in hungry places. It only took one accusation to destroy a family. Fear demanded answers. When none came, it created its own. In rural areas, whole settlements vanished. People abandoned land that could no longer sustain them, hoping to find food elsewhere. Many never did. Roads filled with the starving and the desperate. Some collapsed along the way. Some were turned away from towns already stretched beyond survival. The land itself seemed to reject life. Cold rains flooded fields. Late frosts killed what little growth remained. In some years, snow fell during months that should have been warm. Livestock disease spread quickly among weakened herds. What hunger did not claim, sickness finished. The death was slow, uneven, relentless. And yet, the sun remained. Pale. Distant. Unchanged. Each day it rose, offering just enough light to remind people what they were losing. By the second year, famine was no longer a fear. It was reality. Chroniclers wrote of entire regions reduced to silence. Of towns where smoke no longer rose from chimneys. Of fields reclaimed by cold and weeds. Some wrote that hope itself had thinned. That people moved as if waiting for something worse to arrive. The idea that this was temporary began to fade. What replaced it was darker. People spoke openly now of the sun dying. Of the world slipping into an age of darkness. Of the end of all seasons. Parents told children stories not of the future, but of how things used to be. Warm summers. Full harvests. A sun that could be trusted. For many, those stories sounded like myths. The cold had reshaped memory itself. And still, no explanation came. No sign appeared in the sky to mark an ending. No shift in the light suggested relief. Only the same dull sun, watching as Europe weakened beneath it. By the time people understood the scale of what they faced, there was nothing left to do but endure. And endurance came at a terrible cost. Famine hollowed societies from the inside out. Trust dissolved. Traditions broke. What had once felt permanent, churches, kingdoms, seasons, now felt fragile. The sun had not vanished. But its failure had already begun to undo the world below it. For those living through it, the darkness had no name. No beginning they could point to. No clear end they could prepare for. But centuries later, historians would give this period a title: the late antique Little Ice Age, a stretch of years when temperatures dropped sharply across much of the northern hemisphere. At the center of it all was the sun. Modern evidence suggests that sometime in the early 6th century, a series of massive volcanic eruptions sent enormous quantities of ash and sulfur into the upper atmosphere. The particles spread around the globe, forming a veil high above the Earth that reflected sunlight back into space. The sun did not disappear, but its energy was weakened. Its warmth reduced. For years, the planet received less heat than it needed. The result was a sudden and sustained cooling, enough to disrupt growing seasons, shorten summers, and push already fragile societies past their breaking point. Tree ring data shows unusually slow growth during this period. Ice cores reveal spikes in volcanic material. Written records from across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia describe the same strange dimming, the same cold, the same hunger. What made this event especially devastating was timing. Europe was already in transition. Empires had fractured. Trade networks were weakened. Populations were vulnerable to shock. When the climate failed, there were no reserves left to absorb the blow. Famine did not simply kill individuals. It reshaped societies. Communities that survived did so by abandoning old patterns. Fields were left fallow for years. Settlements were relocated or consolidated. Local authority weakened as people lost faith in systems that could not protect them. Soon after, disease followed hunger. Malnutrition lowered resistance. Crowded conditions and movement of desperate populations accelerated the spread of illness. Within a decade, plague would arrive, compounding the losses and further destabilizing Europe. The cold did not cause every disaster that followed, but it prepared the ground for them. The impact of those years did not fade when temperatures recovered. The damage lingered in quieter ways. Generations that followed carried stories of hunger and cold long after the skies cleared. Parents taught children to fear lean seasons. Communities stored food whenever they could, even in good years. The memory of failure reshaped behavior more deeply than any single catastrophe. Political power shifted as well. Regions that had once relied on distant authorities learned they could not depend on them in moments of crisis. Local leaders gained influence, while centralized control weakened. Survival favored adaptability over tradition. The climate shock did not destroy Europe outright. Instead, it altered its trajectory. Some historians believe the instability of this period accelerated broader transformations already underway. Trade routes changed. Populations moved. Old systems eroded faster than they otherwise might have. What mattered most was not the cold itself, but how unprepared people were for a world that behaved differently than expected. No alarm announced the change. No warning allowed time to adjust. The sun simply failed to deliver what it always had. That is what made the event so frightening. Not its violence, but its subtlety. Even today, the 6th century dimming stands as a reminder that global systems do not need to collapse dramatically to be devastating. Small shifts, sustained over time, can undermine entire civilizations. The people who lived beneath that pale sun did not understand aerosols or atmospheric circulation. They had no models, no forecasts, no data to consult. They only had experience, and that experience told them something fundamental had broken. When warmth returned, relief did not erase what had been learned. The sky could not be trusted blindly again. The seasons were no longer promises, only patterns that might fail. The sun resumed its place in the heavens. But faith in its permanence had been lost. And once a civilization learns that even the sky can change, it carries that knowledge forward, quietly, uneasily, forever. And then, slowly, the veil lifted. The volcanic dust settled. Sunlight strengthened. Temperatures crept upward again. Harvests improved. Animals returned to pasture. Life resumed, but not as it had been before. Those who survived carried the memory of those years with them. A quiet understanding that the natural order could fail. That the sky itself was not guaranteed. In later centuries, stories of darkened suns and endless winters took on mythic form. They were folded into legends, prophecies, and religious warnings. But beneath the symbolism was lived experience. People had watched the sun lose its power. They had felt the world grow colder without explanation. And they had learned how quickly stability could vanish. Today, we understand far more about the forces that shape Earth's climate. We can trace ash layers across continents. Measure temperature shifts year by year. Model how sunlight interacts with the atmosphere. But knowledge has not made us immune. Modern civilization is still built on assumptions of stability. Reliable seasons. Predictable systems. A sun that behaves as expected. The events of the 6th century remind us that those assumptions can fail, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, over time. No single day marked the beginning of collapse. No single sunrise signaled the end. Just a pale sun, rising again and again, while the world beneath it struggled to survive. The sun eventually returned to its strength. But for those who lived through the dimming, something had changed forever. They had learned that even the most constant force in their lives could weaken without warning. And once that truth is known, the world never feels permanent again.